After years of speculation and development kit revisions, we're finally getting a good look at what VR can do for us. And so far, it's pretty impressive. The demos I've had thus far have been genuinely exciting and, at certain points, even terrifying.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
But the thing is, almost all of my experiences with VR have been spent solo. Eve Valkyrie is the only exception there, and while I really enjoyed playing that in multiplayer, even then you're still alone in your cockpit. Your only interaction with others is to try and blow them up while they zip past. VR is amazing, don't get me wrong, but it's also fairly lonely. Where are all the social experiences? So enter Ubisoft with Werewolves Within. Werewolves Within is a multiplayer game that sits you down with a bunch of other players, each represented by a cartoonish avatar. You're all living together in a village, but the problem is, there are werewolves in your midst. Every day the villagers have to work out who the werewolves are, putting people on trial and voting on whether or not to kill the accused. The werewolves, on the other hand, have to convince the other players they're ordinary people, while working together in the night phase to kill off the villagers one at a time. Sound familiar? Should do. Werewolves Within is a video game version of a card version of a reinvention of a party game called Mafia. Let me explain. In 1987, Dmitry Davidoff released a game called Mafia, which works along the same day-night cycle as Werewolves Within. Players try to find the bad guys in their midst before they get outnumbered and killed, basically. 10 years later, a man named Andrew Plotkin reskinned the game and released it as Werewolves when it enjoyed a big resurgence. It was then re-released as card game Ultimate Werewolf in 2008. I've played this game a lot and it's tremendous fun, but it also requires you to pay attention to what everyone is doing at all times. You need to watch other players to see how vocal they're being, which way they vote, whether they're making loads of accusations, but, most importantly, you need to watch for the little things. The shifty glances, the knowing looks, maybe the overly nonchalant sip of the drink. It's a game as much about perception as it is about deduction. Werewolves Within attempts to cater for this nuance, copying gestures, showing whether people are sitting or standing, even illustrating when people are whispering to one another. But those are all pretty broad brushstrokes. Ubisoft surely can't hope to rival the impossibly broad range of expression offered up by the human face. There's also the question that wouldn't stop nagging me all the way through the Werewolves Within announcement video. If you're sat in the same room as all the other players anyway, as these nice people are, well, why wouldn't you just take the headset off and play with people normally? Yeah, I know, people will be looking to play together over the internet, but the problem is, while it looks great, Werewolves Within can't possibly hope to emulate the intricacies of playing a game of werewolf round a table with real humans. But the funny thing is, while it's imperfect, Werewolves Within is, in fact, the best solution I've seen to one of gaming's greatest limitations. Because if there's one thing video games really struggle to do, it's enable meaningful deception. Lying to people is really fun. Watch. See? It's easy. Bluffing games like Ultimate Werewolves, Mafia de Cuba, Sheriff of Nottingham, Masquerade or Coup, they're some of my all-time favourites. Bluffing games like these have been played for hundreds of years, but they're conspicuously absent when it comes to video games. We have a few shining examples, of course, of which Subterfuge is probably the best. That's a game that gets you playing against some friends around the clock, never knowing who's talking to who or whether you can trust any of them. Chris played this a while ago actually, he wrote about it on the site, but you can also watch a day-by-day roundup of how the game went over on Cool Ghosts. I recommend you check it out, not least because it features footage of our very own Chris Bratt in the bath. Similarly, there's also Ruse, which makes information warfare, or misinformation warfare, I suppose, an important part of the real-time strategy experience. There are elements of deception and betrayal in other games, sure. Those games where you don't know if you can trust the other player not to kill you and take your stuff are probably the most fertile ground here, as anyone who's played DayZ can probably tell you. The Dark Zone in The Division is another good example, as it's a place where everyone is in it together, but they might turn against one another at any point. Players have a vested interest in keeping one another alive while dealing with the environmental threats, even if they're planning to betray those players later on. Assassin's Creed's now defunct multiplayer mode was actually pretty interesting while we're at it. It tasked you with hunting another player while doing your best to behave like one of the NPCs, deliberately failing the Turing test, in other words. The only problem there was, nobody bothered playing it that way. We also have surprise twists and elaborate bits of deception in video game stories, but generally speaking, it's the player who's being lied to until it's time for the big reveal, would you kindly?
Would you kindly?
LA Noire made a good go of asking you to read people's facial expressions, but then it was a single-player game in which the computer was the only one making an attempt at deception. You weren't lying to anybody, and you certainly weren't interacting with real people. Other games allow you to lie by way of the dialogue wheel, but that deception is predominantly just a means to an end, same as persuading or intimidating someone into doing something. In these cases, the consequences of your deception are rarely referenced beyond that one point. Even more rarely do they come back to bite you. I've been thinking about this for a few days now, and to be honest, I think the most common way we try to deceive others in video games is through trying to be stealthy, which doesn't really provide the same thrill. Stealthing your way past someone is deception with an aim to people never knowing there's anything wrong in the first place because they never see or hear you. To all intents and purposes, it renders you non-existent. Now compare that with watching your friends squirm because they know there's a traitor among their friends but they can't work out who it is, and it sort of just pales by comparison. So, okay, yeah, deception actually features in quite a few video games, but my point is, with the best examples, Subterfuge and DayZ, that deception is built on top of an existing game that already functions in its own right. It's a meta game. You could play both of these games without touching the social intrigue bit and still have a perfectly good time. You might not get especially far, but the point still stands. When it comes to lying to others and making that deception the core part of the experience, and then making that experience exhilarating, video games still have a long way to go before they catch up with board games. But hey, maybe you disagree, or maybe you thought of an example I didn't, because I'm just one man. Either way, please let me know in the comments, and thank you very much for watching. See ya.
How much ammo have you got? What was free?
Well, I shot 4 bullets there, and then there was another that had 7. So
Well, if you run out of ammo, you just have to kick him to death.
Really?
I think so.
Police brutality much? Jeez, no.